Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week I'm just going to talk briefly about kind of trying to make progress using watercolor paint. Actually, these ideas are probably applicable to any medium, but I'm going to stick with watercolor because that's sort of what I know. That's the main medium that I use. So anyway, a few weeks ago, and I mentioned this on Patreon last week or the week before, a few weeks ago I was digging through some old paintings from about 5 or 6 years ago, and I found one, the image that you can see on screen on the left hand side. So this was one of my first attempts at using watercolor paint, and I was trying to paint a tree. As you can see, the results were not very impressive, but we all start somewhere, and this is where I was starting from in watercolor. So it sort of inspired me, what if I do a similar painting today, trying to just paint a tree, sort of portrait of a tree. What would it look like? Would it be any better? How much or how little progress have I made over those 5 or 6 years? So painting a tree, there's no references, it's just imagination. And it is just painting a tree. So it's not a tree in a landscape or anything, it's just basically just painting a tree. So the image on the right is from, I'd say, a few weeks ago, and it is not perfect, but it is better, I think. Now, words like good, bad, better, worse, those are, they're very subjective. What do I mean when I say I think it's better than the old painting? Well, I think it's more interesting. It's more interesting to look at. And things that are more interesting to look at, people will look at them longer and are more likely to go, I like that. They may be complimented. So that's what I mean when I say it's better. It's just visually more interesting. So then the question would be, well, what is it? What makes it visually more interesting? Because maybe if we can isolate those things, maybe that's something that we can all work on and try to make our art more interesting to look at. So I think one of the things that really stands out in these two images is values. So in other words, how dark and light the different colors are. And I think you can see that even just looking at them. But if we remove the colors and just look at the sort of black and white, I think it's really obvious the difference. So again, the image on the right is the more recent one. The image on the left is the older one. And the older image, there really isn't a huge amount of variation in the values. Everything's just sort of a mid-grey tone. So I'd say the values do a few things. They make it more interesting to look at, more variety. They also help to define the shapes, so the shape of the tree, and any shadows beneath the tree on the land. So when you don't really have much variety or much variation in the values, you're sort of missing all of that information. And that's one of the problems with this older painting. So somewhere along the way, I've learned to use values slightly better. I should say I'm still not a realistic painter, and I never will be. I don't like realistic painting. It just doesn't do it for me. Each to their own. So I much prefer the sort of impressionistic style, looser style of painting, especially with watercolor. I just think watercolor looks much better, loose style watercolors compared to the tighter attempts maybe at realism or even photorealism. I'm not sure watercolor is the best medium for that, but that's just my opinion. So values, definitely something that you can work on. You can start working on it today if you want to. And I think adding in that variety does make your paintings more interesting to look at, and in that sense makes them better. Another thing that helped, but unfortunately takes longer to develop, is confidence. So with any new medium, it takes a bit of time, even if you have experience. So for example, now I have a few years experience of doing art. If I was to switch over to oil painting, there would be a learning curve there, because oil paint, of course, is very, very different to watercolor. So you gotta build up the confidence, and I think being able to make confident marks with your medium, whatever it is, definitely helps your art to look better. That sort of confidence shows up in the final painting, I think. Okay, so we go back and look at the colored versions. Not everything has changed. So yes, it's more confident and the values are better, the use of values, but some things are the same. In both cases, I was trying to get this loose, impressionistic style. That hasn't changed. I'm better at doing it now than I was 5 or 6 years ago. The other thing that hasn't changed is the color scheme. It's pretty similar. It's sort of blues, yellows, and greens. 5 or 6 years ago, I had no idea why I was using those. It was just sort of an intuitive thing. I liked that combination of colors. Nowadays, I understand a little bit more about color theory, and so I know why I continue to use that color scheme, or something very similar to it. So color theory, a lot of it is built on the idea of the color wheel, and you have the primary colors, the red, blue, and yellow. At least that's the sort of traditional colors for art. There are other systems out there, but if we stick with that, red, blue, and yellow as your primaries, and you can see a version of a color wheel on the left hand side. In between the primaries, you've got the secondary colors, the orange, green, and purple, and so on. Tertiaries then are your sort of orange yellow or greenish yellow, and so on. If you look at the bottom of that color wheel, you have the blue, green, and yellow. They're all sort of on the bottom half of the color wheel. They're analogous colors, so they're similar colors, kind of. They're on the same side of the color wheel. Unlike using, say, green and red, which are complementary colors and are going to sort of clash and fight against each other, the analogous color scheme is like a group of well-behaved children all just sitting quietly, no fighting going on. Whereas the complementary colors are more like siblings or children that constantly arguing and fighting over stuff. So I now understand, because I have a slightly better understanding of color theory, why, what an analogous color scheme is, how to set it up, what a complementary color scheme or split complementary color schemes, and I understand all of these things now, and so I'm better able to choose a color scheme. And I understand now why the blue, yellow, and green, why I like it and why it sort of works in terms of creating a quiet, peaceful sort of atmosphere in the painting. In terms of rules and theories and all of that stuff, the theoretical side of art, there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. So on the right hand side we have two quotes. The top quote is often attributed to Pablo Picasso. So learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. So that quote is suggesting that there are indeed rules. You can learn those rules, master them, really understand them, and then you're free to bend them or break them as you see fit as an artist. That's one way of looking at it. Underneath that, there's a second quote. There are no rules. It's pretty simple, pretty direct. No such thing as rules. And this is a quote that's attributed to Helen Frankenfeller. She was an abstract expressionist artist. And if I sort of expand on it and sort of use my own words, I think what she was saying was putting these rules, this sort of artificial restraints on artists is a bad thing because it limits originality and creativity and so on. And these things were very important within the modernist art movement, these sort of concepts. So I understand her idea. There are no rules and there shouldn't be any rules. I have a slightly different slant on this idea. Some people say, which one is better? Learn the rules and then break them, or just ignore any sort of rules? Which one is the best approach? I say my approach is slightly different. I don't see them as rules. I see them as choices. So with color theory or something like perspective, so let's say we're painting a tree, and the tree is in a field or something. Do we want to create a sense of depth in that painting? If we do, we're probably going to have to use some sort of perspective, aerial perspective or linear perspective. So I see that not as a set of rules, but as a set of choices. And that's because of the way I approach art. If you're into art more in terms of realism and naturalism, things like perspective are no longer choices. They are indeed rules. You have to follow them. You have to use them. That's the whole concept of naturalistic painting, is you want to make it look natural. And to do that, you have to give it that sense of depth, that three-dimensionality. So you have to use perspective, and you have to follow the rules of perspective. You can't just make stuff up. When you have a more sort of modernist, abstract approach to making art, I say I don't see them as rules. I see them as choices. I can either follow them if I want to, or I can break them or bend them or just ignore them. So it is a freer way of approaching art. So should you learn these rules, or in my cases, as I would call them, choices? Well, I think learning about perspective, learning about color theory and so on, it helps you to make informed choices. So even if you choose not to use linear perspective, for example, by knowing about it, you're making that deliberate, informed choice, rather than just being ignorant of the existence of linear perspective or aerial perspective, for example. So I think it is definitely worth learning about color theory and perspective and composition and all that kind of stuff, values and so on. Once you've learned it and you understand it, then I say you're in a better position to make an informed choice about how you want to use it, if you want to use it at all, or just ignore it. Anyway, those are my ideas on rules and theories and the theoretical side of art. So there's a few things in there that might help people, let's say, to make progress. Definitely work on the idea of values. Learn about things like values and composition and perspective and color theory. All of that information and those ideas will help you to make progress in art, I think. The other thing then, of course, is just practice, and more practice, because you've got to build up confidence using the medium, and that does take time. There's no shortcuts or quick ways around it. It takes time to build up confidence. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching and listening. Hopefully see you again in 2 weeks' time.